The water hit Benjamin Harrison's chest like ice daggers as he waded deeper into the Yellowstone River, his weathered hands trembling not from the 40-degree current but from what he'd just seen. The German Shepherd trapped on the log 20 feet ahead wasn't just any dog. It was wearing a faded service vest with a unit patch he recognized, the same patch his son Marcus had worn before coming home broken from Afghanistan. Grace Henderson's scream pierced the morning air from the riverbank behind him. "Ben, that log's breaking apart." The massive cottonwood groaned and shifted, carrying the exhausted dog closer to the deadly rapids downstream. Ben's heart hammered against his ribs as a terrible realization crashed over him. This wasn't some random rescue. This was the therapy dog Marcus had begged him for, the one Ben had refused to let his son keep because real men don't need emotional crutches. "Jesus Christ," Ben whispered, his voice lost in the roar of spring snowmelt. The same dog that might have saved his son's life was now dying because of his pride. How long did they both have before the current claimed them? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Benjamin Harrison had never expected to spend his 68th birthday planning his own funeral. But that's exactly what he'd been doing when he spotted the drowning German Shepherd. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man who'd spent 30 years pulling people from burning buildings was now broke, alone, and ready to let the bank pull his ranch out from under him in 29 days. The morning had started like every other since Sarah's death 3 years ago. Ben set 2 coffee cups on the kitchen table out of habit, caught himself and put one back with shaking hands. The silence in the ranch house was deafening, broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock Sarah had loved and the occasional creak of settling timber. He'd built this place for her 43 years ago, back when his firefighter's pension seemed like enough, and his son Marcus was still small enough to ride on his shoulders. Marcus. Even thinking the name felt like swallowing broken glass. 2 years since his boy had put a gun to his head in the barn, leaving behind a note that Ben had read so many times the paper was wearing thin at the creases. "I'm sorry, Dad. I tried to be the man you wanted me to be. But the war broke something inside me that can't be fixed." The medical bills from Sarah's cancer had taken the savings. Marcus's funeral and the months of counseling Ben had refused for himself had taken the rest. Now the First National Bank of Billings owned more of his land than he did, and the foreclosure notice taped to his front door might as well have been his death warrant. At 68, with a bum heart and hands that shook from too much bourbon and too little sleep, starting over wasn't an option. He'd been driving the long way to town, anything to avoid seeing that damn notice, when he heard the barking. The Yellowstone River ran high this time of year, swollen with snowmelt from the mountains, and it wasn't uncommon for debris to wash downstream. But dogs didn't usually bark from the middle of rushing water. Ben had pulled his rusted Ford to the shoulder and climbed out, expecting to see some fool's pet that had wandered too close to the bank. Instead, he found himself staring at something that made his blood run cold. The German Shepherd clinging to that log wasn't just any dog. It was wearing the kind of service vest he'd seen before. The kind Marcus had talked about getting from the VA hospital. The kind Ben had told his son he didn't need because real men handle their problems without crutches. Now, standing waist-deep in water that could kill him, Ben understood with crystal clarity that he was looking at either his redemption or his execution. Maybe both. The dog's desperate brown eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human, and when their gazes met across the churning water, Ben could have sworn he heard Marcus's voice carried on the wind. "Do it right this time, Dad." The barking grew weaker as Ben watched from the riverbank, each plaintive cry cutting through him like a blade. The German Shepherd's paws were slipping on the wet bark, and the log beneath her was starting to splinter under the relentless pressure of the current. He had maybe 10 minutes before that makeshift raft broke apart completely, sending the dog tumbling toward the rapids a quarter-mile downstream. Ben Harrison, what in God's name are you doing out here? The voice behind him belonged to Grace Henderson, and it carried the same no-nonsense tone she'd used during her 30 years as head nurse at Billings General. Ben turned to see her climbing out of her silver Honda, her gray hair pulled back in the practical bun she'd worn since the day they'd met at Sarah's bedside. "There's a dog," Ben said, pointing toward the river. His voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. Grace moved to stand beside him, squinting against the morning sun reflecting off the water. When she spotted the German Shepherd, her intake of breath was sharp and immediate. "Dear Lord, how long has she been out there?" "Don't know. Just found her." Ben's hands were already moving to his belt, unbuckling the leather strap with fingers that felt clumsy and thick. "Water's moving fast. Spring runoff's got her trapped." "Ben, no." Grace's hand shot out to grab his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You can't go in there. That current will kill you." "Then we call for help." "With what? There's no cell service in this canyon, and by the time we drive back to town—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew the dog would be dead long before any rescue team could arrive. Ben pulled off his worn leather boots, then his jacket, letting them fall to the rocky shore. The morning air bit through his flannel shirt, but it was nothing compared to the cold that had been living in his chest for the past 2 years. "If I don't make it back, tell them I tried. Ben Harrison, don't you dare make me watch another good man die." Grace's voice cracked on the last word, and Ben remembered that she'd lost her own son to a car accident 10 years ago. Her boy had been coming home from college for Christmas when a drunk driver ran a red light in Bozeman. But Ben was already wading into the water, the shock of the cold driving the breath from his lungs. The river bottom was treacherous, smooth stones and hidden holes that could trap a man's foot and hold him under. He used his firefighter training, testing each step, never fighting the current but working with it, angling upstream to reach the stranded dog. The German Shepherd watched his approach with intelligent brown eyes that seemed far too knowing for an animal. As Ben got closer, he could make out details that made his heart race. The service vest was faded but well maintained, and there was something achingly familiar about the dog's coloring, the black and tan markings that reminded him of the photographs Marcus had shown him from the VA hospital. "Easy, girl," Ben called out, his voice barely audible over the rush of water. "I'm coming." The dog's tail gave a tentative wag, and that small gesture of trust nearly undid him. When had anyone, human or animal, looked at him with such faith? When had he last been someone worth saving? The log shifted ominously as Ben reached for it, the current trying to tear it loose from the rocks that held it in place. The German Shepherd whined, pressing herself lower against the bark, and Ben could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. She'd been fighting this battle for a long time. "I've got you," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. The water was deeper here, coming up to his chest, and the cold was already making his movements sluggish. At 68, with a heart that skipped beats and hands that hadn't been steady since Sarah died, he was probably signing his own death warrant. But as his fingers finally closed around the dog's collar, something extraordinary happened. Instead of panicking or snapping at him, the German Shepherd placed her paw on his hand, a deliberate, gentle touch that spoke of training and intelligence and something deeper than instinct. That's when Ben saw the dog tags hanging from her collar, half hidden by wet fur. With numb fingers, he turned them over and felt the world stop spinning. The name engraved in the metal hit him like a physical blow. Liberty. Therapy dog. Property of Marcus Harrison. Marcus had gotten his therapy dog after all. Somehow, without Ben's knowledge or permission, his son had found the help he'd been begging for. And now that same dog was dying in Ben's arms because he'd been too proud and too stubborn to listen when it mattered most. The world tilted on its axis as Ben stared at the dog tags in his trembling hand. Liberty, therapy dog, property of Marcus Harrison. The metal was warm from the dog's body heat, but the words burned into his vision like brands. His son, his broken, desperate son, had found a way to get the help Ben had refused to let him have. "Marcus," he whispered, and Liberty's ears perked up at the name. She knew that name. She remembered. The log beneath them groaned and shifted, jarring Ben back to the immediate danger. The current was relentless, pulling at his legs, trying to sweep them both downstream toward the white-capped rapids that would kill them as surely as bullets. But for the first time in 2 years, Ben Harrison had something worth fighting for that wasn't his own misery. "Grace!" he shouted toward shore, where the retired nurse stood ankle-deep in the shallows, her face white with terror. "There's rope in my truck, toolbox behind the cab." Grace didn't hesitate. She turned and ran toward his ford, her sensible shoes slipping on the wet rocks but never faltering. 30 years of emergency medicine had taught her to act first and panic later. Liberty pressed closer to Ben, her body trembling with exhaustion and cold. Up close he could see she was older than he'd first thought. Maybe 7 or 8 years old, with gray starting to show around her muzzle. How long had she been Marcus's companion? How many nights had she lain beside his son's bed, sensing the nightmares, providing the comfort that Ben had been too proud to offer? "I'm sorry, girl," Ben said, his voice breaking. "I'm so damn sorry." The dog looked up at him with those knowing brown eyes, and Ben could have sworn he saw forgiveness there. Liberty placed her paw on his chest, right over his heart, and held it there, a gesture so deliberate and human that it took his breath away. "Got it!" Grace's voice carried across the water. She was back at the shoreline, holding a coil of yellow nylon rope that had seen better days but looked strong enough to hold. "Can you catch it?" "Throw it upstream," Ben called back. "Let the current bring it to us." Grace's first throw fell short, the rope landing in the water 10 feet away from them. The second throw was better, but the current caught it and pulled it past them before Ben could grab it. He could feel Liberty's strength ebbing, her paws losing their grip on the slick bark. They had maybe one more chance before the log broke free completely. "Come on, Grace," Ben muttered under his breath. "You've got steadier hands than any surgeon I know." The third throw was perfect. The rope landed just upstream from the log, and Ben lunged for it, catching the end as it swept past. The sudden movement made Liberty lose her footing, and for a terrifying moment she slipped toward the edge of the log. Ben grabbed her with his free arm, pulling her tight against his chest. "I've got you," he said, and this time he meant it. "I've got you, and I'm not letting go." Tying the rope around both of them was a nightmare of numb fingers and shifting balance. Liberty seemed to understand what he was trying to do and held perfectly still, even when the knots pulled at her fur. Her trust was absolute, and it humbled him in a way that 40 years of Sarah's patient love never had. "We're secured," Ben shouted to Grace. "Pull us in." What followed was the longest 3 minutes of Ben Harrison's life. Grace wasn't a large woman, maybe 5'4" and 130 pounds soaking wet, but she had the determination of someone who'd spent decades refusing to let people die on her watch. She wrapped the rope around her waist and leaned back, using her entire body weight to fight the current. The log shifted beneath them, and Ben felt it start to break apart. Chunks of bark peeled away, and the wood beneath groaned like a living thing in pain. Liberty whined, pressing closer to him, and Ben could feel her heart hammering against his ribs. Or maybe that was his own heart, racing with terror and something that might have been hope. "Almost there," Grace called out, her voice strained with effort. 20 more feet. 15 feet. 10. The log finally gave way completely, dissolving into fragments that the current swept away like matchsticks. But by then Ben's boots were touching bottom, and Grace was wading out to meet them, her face flushed with exertion and relief. They dragged themselves onto the rocky shore, all three of them gasping and shaking from cold and adrenaline. Liberty immediately pressed herself against Ben's side, her warm body a lifeline in the aftermath of terror. She was alive. They were all alive. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Grace panted, sitting heavily on a boulder. "I thought we'd lost you both." Ben's hands moved automatically to check Liberty for injuries, his fingers finding a small cut on her left paw but nothing else serious. She submitted to his examination with the patience of a dog accustomed to medical attention, and he wondered how many times Marcus had done this same thing, checking her over after a difficult day, making sure she was all right. She was his, Ben said quietly, showing Grace the dog tags. Liberty. She was Marcus's therapy dog. Grace's expression shifted from relief to something deeper, understanding maybe, or recognition of the cruel irony. "Oh, Ben, you never knew?" "He tried to tell me. I wouldn't listen." The words tasted like ashes in his mouth. "I told him real men don't need emotional crutches. I told him to handle his problems like a soldier." Liberty's warm tongue rasped across his cheek, and for a moment Ben allowed himself to believe it was forgiveness. But forgiveness would have to wait. Right now, he had to get Marcus's dog somewhere warm and safe, and figure out how a therapy dog that should have been with his son had ended up drowning in the Yellowstone River 2 years after Marcus's death. Grace's farmhouse sat 3 miles upstream from where they'd pulled Liberty from the river, a white clapboard structure with blue shutters that had weathered 40 Montana winters with stubborn grace. Ben had been inside exactly twice, once for the funeral dinner after Sarah died, and once when Grace had tried to bring him a casserole during those dark weeks after Marcus's suicide. Both times he'd been drunk and ungrateful, and both times Grace had pretended not to notice. Now she bustled around her kitchen with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades managing medical emergencies, pulling towels from the linen closet and setting a kettle on the gas stove. Liberty lay pressed against Ben's legs as he sat shivering in Grace's kitchen chair, his wet clothes making puddles on her clean linoleum floor. "Strip out of those clothes before you catch pneumonia," Grace ordered, tossing him a thick terry cloth robe that had probably belonged to her late husband. "There's dry clothes in the guest room. Jim's things should fit you well enough." Ben wanted to argue, but his teeth were chattering too hard to form words. Liberty whined softly and pressed closer to him, sharing what little body heat she had left. Even soaking wet and exhausted, the dog's first instinct was to comfort him. "She's trained for this," Ben said, his voice hoarse from the cold water he'd swallowed. "The way she's acting. This is what therapy dogs do." Grace paused in her bustling to study Liberty more closely. The German Shepherd was indeed displaying classic support behavior, monitoring Ben's breathing and heart rate, positioning herself to provide maximum physical contact without restricting his movement. "She's good at her job. Marcus must have worked with her extensively." The mention of his son's name sent a fresh wave of guilt crashing over Ben. While he was changing into Jim Henderson's old flannel shirt and work pants, questions churned in his mind like the river current that had nearly killed them both. Where had Liberty been for the past 2 years? How had she ended up in the river? And why was she still wearing her service vest as if she'd been working just hours ago? When he returned to the kitchen, Grace had Liberty wrapped in towels and was examining her more thoroughly with the practiced hands of someone who'd spent decades assessing patients. The dog submitted to the inspection with patient dignity, though her eyes never left Ben's face. "She's dehydrated and exhausted, but otherwise healthy," Grace announced. "No signs of abuse or neglect. Her coat is clean, nails are trimmed, teeth are good. Someone's been taking care of her." "But who?" Ben accepted the mug of coffee Grace pressed into his hands, inhaling the steam gratefully. "Marcus has been dead for 2 years. If he had a therapy dog, what happened to her after he died?" Grace settled into the chair across from him, her own coffee growing cold as she studied Liberty with growing concern. "Ben, there's something else. Look at her collar. Really look at it." Ben leaned forward, pushing aside the thick fur around Liberty's neck. The collar was good quality leather, well maintained but showing signs of regular wear. What caught his attention, though, were the additional tags hanging beside Liberty's ID. A rabies vaccination tag dated just 3 months ago. A license from the town of Red Lodge, also current. And something else. A smaller tag with a phone number engraved in tiny script. "Someone's been keeping her," Grace said quietly. "Someone's been taking care of Marcus's dog for 2 years without telling you." The phone number belonged to a Dr. Patricia Mills, according to the reverse directory Grace found online. The address was in Red Lodge, about 30 miles south of where they'd found Liberty in the river. Dr. Mills was listed as a veterinary psychologist specializing in therapy animal training. "A what?" Ben stared at the computer screen in Grace's living room, his wet hair still dripping onto his shoulders. "Veterinary psychologist. They work with animals who have behavioral problems or train them for specific therapeutic purposes." Grace clicked through several more search results. "Look at this. Dr. Mills used to run a therapy dog program through the VA hospital in Billings. She specialized in PTSD cases." Ben's stomach clenched. Marcus got Liberty through the VA? It looks like it. But according to this, Dr. Mills lost her license 18 months ago. Something about... Grace's voice trailed off as she read further. "Oh my God, Ben. She lost her license after a client died by suicide." The family claimed her treatment methods were negligent. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Marcus had somehow connected with Dr. Mills and gotten Liberty through her program. After Marcus's death, Dr. Mills had kept the dog, possibly illegally. And now, somehow, Liberty had ended up in the river. "We need to call this number," Ben said, reaching for Grace's phone. The call went straight to voicemail, and the voice that answered made Ben's blood run cold. It was a woman, but there was something wrong with her tone. Too cheerful, too bright. Like someone trying very hard to sound normal. "Hello, you've reached Dr. Patricia Mills. I'm not available right now, but if this is about Liberty, don't worry. I'm taking very good care of her. She's exactly where she belongs, and she's never been happier. Please don't call again." Grace and Ben stared at each other across the kitchen table. Liberty, who had been dozing by the stove, suddenly lifted her head and whined, a low, anxious sound that raised the hair on Ben's arms. "That woman has been keeping Marcus's dog for 2 years," Grace said slowly. "But why? And how did Liberty end up in the river if she was supposedly being cared for?" Before Ben could answer, Liberty was on her feet, pacing to the window and back, her entire body radiating distress. She kept looking toward the door, then back at Ben, her message clear. They needed to leave. Now. "She's trying to tell us something," Ben said, standing up despite the exhaustion that made his bones feel like lead. "Maybe she knows the way back to wherever she's been living." Grace grabbed her keys from the hook by the door. "Then we follow her." The drive south toward Red Lodge was tense with unspoken questions. Liberty rode in the back seat of Grace's Honda, her nose pressed to the window, giving occasional whines of direction when Grace needed to turn. She was leading them somewhere specific, and her urgency was increasing with every mile. They found Dr. Mills' property 20 minutes outside of Red Lodge, a rundown veterinary clinic that had clearly been abandoned for months. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown with weeds, and several windows were boarded over. But there were signs of recent habitation, tire tracks in the gravel, a generator humming behind the building, and lights visible through the uncovered windows. Liberty was out of the car before Grace had fully stopped, racing toward the building with the desperate energy of a dog who knew she was home. Ben and Grace followed more cautiously, their footsteps crunching on broken glass and debris. The front door hung open, revealing a waiting room that had been converted into a makeshift living space. Camping equipment was scattered across the floor, along with empty food cans and stacks of veterinary journals. The air smelled of antiseptic and something else, something organic and unpleasant that made Grace wrinkle her nose in disgust. "Hello?" Ben called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. "Dr. Mills? We're here about Liberty." The response came from deeper in the building, a woman's voice, but distorted by what sounded like crying or laughter. "She came back. I knew she would come back to me." They found Dr. Patricia Mills in what had once been the main examination room. She was a small woman in her early 60s with gray hair that hung in unwashed tangles around her face. Her clothes were dirty and torn, and her eyes held the wild gleam of someone who had been living alone for too long. But it was the walls that made Ben's stomach lurch. They were covered with photographs, dozens of them, all showing Marcus in his army uniform. Some looked like they'd been taken from military records, others from social media or newspaper articles. In the center of the display was Marcus's obituary, surrounded by pictures of Liberty in various stages of training. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Dr. Mills said, reaching out to stroke Liberty's head with shaking hands. "I've taken such good care of her. Much better care than anyone else would have given her." "Ma'am," Grace said carefully, "we need to talk about what happened today. How did Liberty end up in the river?" Dr. Mills' expression shifted, becoming defensive and slightly paranoid. "That wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to stay here with me. She was supposed to understand that I'm the only one who really cares about her." Ben felt a chill that had nothing to do with his earlier dunking in the Yellowstone. "You put her in the river?" "I had to test her loyalty." Dr. Mills' voice rose to a near shriek. "Marcus died because nobody truly cared about him. If Liberty really loved him, if she was really worth saving, then someone would come for her. Someone would risk everything to save her, just like Marcus needed someone to risk everything to save him." The twisted logic hit Ben like a physical blow. This woman had used Liberty as bait, throwing her into the river to see if anyone cared enough to rescue her. It was a deranged test of worthiness that could have killed them both. "You're insane," he said, taking a step toward Dr. Mills. "You could have killed her." "But someone did come." Dr. Mills clapped her hands together with disturbing glee. "You came. Marcus's father came to save his dog. That proves Marcus was worth saving too." Liberty had positioned herself between Ben and Dr. Mills, her hackles raised and a low growl rumbling in her throat. The dog's protective instincts had kicked in, and she clearly recognized Dr. Mills as a threat. "We're taking Liberty with us," Ben said firmly. "She doesn't belong to you." "She belongs to Marcus!" Dr. Mills screamed. "And Marcus is dead because nobody cared enough to save him. I'm the only one who understands what she's been through. I'm the only one who knows how to take care of her." Grace had her phone out, quietly dialing 911, but Ben could see the calculation in Dr. Mills' eyes. The woman was unstable, possibly dangerous, and she clearly had no intention of letting Liberty go without a fight. "You're right," Ben said, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Marcus is dead, and maybe if I'd listened to him, if I'd let him keep Liberty in the first place, he'd still be alive. But keeping her prisoner in this place isn't honoring his memory. It's desecrating it." Dr. Mills stared at him with wide, unblinking eyes. "You don't understand. She needs me. Without me, she'll forget him. Without me, it's like he never existed at all." Ben looked down at Liberty, who was still standing guard between him and the disturbed veterinarian. The dog's devotion was absolute, but it wasn't directed at Dr. Mills. Despite 2 years of captivity, Liberty had recognized Ben immediately and chosen to trust him with her life. "She hasn't forgotten him," Ben said quietly, "and neither have I. But Marcus wouldn't want her living like this. He wouldn't want any of us living like this." The sound of Dr. Mills' laughter was like broken glass scraping against concrete. She stood in the center of her shrine to Marcus, surrounded by stolen photographs and veterinary equipment that hadn't been used in months, and laughed until tears streamed down her hollow cheeks. "You think you can just walk in here and take her?" Dr. Mills wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks of dirt across her face. "You think you have more right to her than I do? Where were you when Marcus was crying himself to sleep every night? Where were you when he begged for help?" Ben felt each word like a physical blow, but he forced himself to remain steady. Liberty was still positioned between him and Dr. Mills, her entire body coiled with protective tension. Grace had moved to flank Dr. Mills from the other side, her phone clutched in her hand, waiting for the right moment to complete her 911 call. "I was being a fool," Ben said quietly. "I was being exactly the kind of man who thinks admitting weakness is worse than dying from it. But that doesn't give you the right to keep Marcus's dog prisoner." "Prisoner?" Dr. Mills' voice pitched higher, becoming shrill. "I saved her. After Marcus died, the VA was going to retire her, put her in some suburban home where she'd spend her days chasing tennis balls and forgetting she ever had a purpose. I gave her a purpose. I kept Marcus alive through her." She gestured wildly at the photographs covering the walls, her movements jerky and uncontrolled. "Every day I tell her about Marcus. Every day I show her his pictures. I've kept his memory alive in ways you never could, because you never even tried to understand what he was going through." Ben's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but Liberty's presence kept him grounded. The dog was watching him carefully, reading his emotional state with the expertise of years of training. When she sensed his anger rising, she pressed closer to his leg, not seeking comfort, but offering it. "You want to know what Marcus was going through?" Ben's voice was deadly quiet. "He was going through hell, and I made it worse by telling him to handle it alone. He needed help, and I told him real men don't need therapy dogs. He needed his father to listen, and I told him to stop making excuses. So don't you stand there and lecture me about not understanding my own son." Dr. Mills flinched as if he'd struck her, but her grip on reality remained tenuous. "You abandoned him. You let him die. At least I've been taking care of what he left behind." "Taking care of her?" Grace spoke for the first time since they'd entered the examination room, her voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in emergency medicine. "Look at this place, Dr. Mills. Look at yourself. This isn't care. This is obsession." The abandoned clinic was indeed a testament to deteriorating mental health. Empty food cans were stacked in precarious towers along the walls. Medical journals and notebooks covered every available surface, their pages filled with rambling observations about Liberty's behavior. The smell Ben had noticed earlier was stronger here, the smell of someone who had stopped caring about basic hygiene weeks or months ago. "She's happy here," Dr. Mills insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "She knows this is where she belongs, with someone who understands her value." As if responding to her name, Liberty moved away from Ben and approached Dr. Mills slowly. The woman's face lit up with desperate hope, her hands reaching out to stroke the dog's head. But instead of accepting the attention, Liberty began a careful inspection of Dr. Mills, her nose working systematically to assess the woman's physical and emotional state. After a moment, Liberty sat back and looked directly at Ben, her expression grave. She whined once, a low, troubled sound, and then returned to Ben's side. The message was clear. Dr. Mills was not well, and Liberty knew it. "She's trying to tell you something," Ben said gently. "Liberty's a therapy dog, Dr. Mills. She can sense when someone is in distress, and right now she's more worried about you than she is about herself." Dr. Mills stared at the dog with growing desperation. No, she loves me. I'm the one who's taken care of her. I'm the one who's kept Marcus's memory alive. By keeping her locked up in an abandoned building? By throwing her in a river to test whether anyone cared enough to save her? Ben took a step forward, his voice hardening. That's not love, Dr. Mills. That's not even close to love. The woman's composure cracked completely. She sank to her knees on the dirty floor, her hands pressed to her face, her body shaking with sobs that sounded like they'd been building for months. I lost my license because of him, she whispered through her fingers. Marcus was my patient, and when he died, they said it was my fault. They said I should have seen the signs. They said I should have done more. Grace moved closer, her nurturing instincts overriding her caution. Dr. Mills, you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Marcus made his choice, and it wasn't your fault any more than it was Ben's fault. But I was supposed to help him. Dr. Mills looked up with red-rimmed eyes. I was supposed to make him better. And when I failed, when he died, I thought maybe if I could just keep Liberty safe, if I could just prove that his therapy dog was worth saving, then maybe it would mean Marcus was worth saving too. The twisted logic was heartbreaking in its desperation. Dr. Mills had been carrying the same guilt that had been eating at Ben, but she'd twisted it into something poisonous and obsessive. She'd convinced herself that keeping Liberty was somehow honoring Marcus's memory, when in reality she was imprisoning the one thing that might have helped him heal. Marcus was worth saving, Ben said firmly, but not because of anything you or I could have done. He was worth saving because he was human, because he was my son, because he mattered. And Liberty is worth saving for the same reason, not because she represents Marcus, but because she's a living being who deserves better than this. Liberty seemed to understand that she was the subject of discussion. She approached Dr. Mills again, but this time she didn't inspect or assess. Instead, she gently placed her head on the woman's knee, a gesture of comfort and forgiveness that brought fresh tears to Dr. Mills' eyes. She doesn't hate me, Dr. Mills whispered in wonder. No, Ben said. She doesn't hate you, but she knows she doesn't belong here. Just like Marcus knew, he didn't belong in the dark place his mind had become. The sound of sirens in the distance broke the moment. Grace's 911 call had gone through after all, and help was on the way. Dr. Mills heard them too, and her expression shifted from despair to panic. They'll take her away from me, she said, scrambling to her feet. They'll put her in a shelter or give her to strangers who don't understand what she means. They'll give her to me, Ben said with quiet certainty. She was Marcus's dog, which makes her family, and I don't abandon family anymore. Dr. Mills stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for signs of deception or false promises. What she saw there must have satisfied her, because her shoulders sagged with defeat and relief in equal measure. There's something else, she said, her voice barely audible over the approaching sirens. Something I never told anyone about Marcus's last session with me. Ben's heart stopped. What? He made a video, on his phone. He said it was for Liberty, in case something happened to him. I've had it all this time, but I couldn't bring myself to watch it. She pulled a battered smartphone from her pocket. Marcus's phone, Ben realized with a jolt. His son's final messages, locked away for 2 years in the hands of a woman too consumed by guilt to face the truth. He made it the day before he died, Dr. Mills continued, holding the phone out to Ben with shaking hands. He said Liberty would know what to do with it when the time was right. Ben stared at the phone as if it were a live snake. His son's final words, recorded just hours before he'd walked into the barn and ended his own life. Did he really want to know what Marcus had been thinking in those last moments? Liberty made the decision for him. She approached Ben and gently took his hand in her mouth, guiding it toward the phone with the same deliberate care she'd shown throughout their ordeal. Her message was clear. It was time to listen to what Marcus had wanted to say. The police cars were pulling into the parking lot now, their red and blue lights painting the abandoned clinic in alternating colors of emergency and law. But Ben barely noticed them. All his attention was focused on the phone in his hands and the dog at his side, Marcus's dog, who had somehow survived 2 years of captivity to bring her handler's final message home. The police station and Red Lodge smelled like burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant, scents that took Ben back to countless nights spent giving statements after particularly bad fires. He sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair in the waiting area, Liberty pressed against his legs, while Grace handled the paperwork with the efficient authority of someone who'd spent decades dealing with medical emergencies and their legal aftermath. Dr. Patricia Mills had been taken away in handcuffs, but not before confessing to everything: the illegal retention of Liberty, the river incident, even her plans to eventually test other therapy animals to see if their handlers had been worth saving. The detective handling the case, a weathered man named Rodriguez who looked like he'd seen too much human stupidity to be surprised by anything, had been surprisingly sympathetic. "She'll get the help she needs," Rodriguez had assured them. "Psychiatric evaluation, probably mandatory treatment. The charges are serious, but her mental state is going to be the bigger issue." Now they were waiting for the final paperwork to be processed, the documents that would officially transfer Liberty's custody to Ben. His son's phone sat heavy in his jacket pocket, its weight seeming to increase with every passing minute. He hadn't worked up the courage to play Marcus's final video yet, and Liberty seemed to sense his reluctance. She kept nudging his hand toward the pocket, her persistence gentle but unwavering. "You're going to have to face it eventually," Grace said, settling into the chair beside him. She'd finished with the legal requirements and was now studying Ben with the same clinical assessment she'd once used on patients in crisis. "Whatever Marcus recorded, he wanted you to see it." "What if it's angry?" Ben's voice came out rougher than he'd intended. "What if his last words were about how much he hated me for not listening?" Grace's expression softened. "Then you'll know, and you'll deal with it. But what if they weren't? What if you're torturing yourself for nothing?" Liberty whined softly and placed her paw on Ben's thigh, applying just enough pressure to get his attention. Her brown eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human, and Ben could swear she was trying to communicate something specific. The dog had been Marcus's constant companion during those final months. If anyone knew what his son had been thinking, it would be her. With trembling fingers, Ben pulled out the phone and powered it on. The lock screen showed a photo of Marcus and Liberty together, both of them grinning at the camera with the easy happiness that had been so rare in Marcus's final year. Ben's throat constricted as he realized the photo had been taken in the barn, the same barn where Marcus had died just days later. The video was easy to find. It was the last item in Marcus's photo gallery, time-stamped at 11:47 p.m. on the night before his suicide. Ben's finger hovered over the play button for several seconds before Liberty made the decision for him, pressing her nose against the screen with deliberate pressure. Marcus's face filled the display, thinner than Ben remembered, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. But his expression was calm, almost peaceful, as he looked directly into the camera. "Hey, Liberty girl," Marcus said, his voice so familiar that it felt like a knife twisting in Ben's chest. "I know this is going to be confusing for you, and I'm sorry about that. Dogs don't understand why people leave, do they? You just know that one day we're there, and the next day we're not." Liberty whined at the sound of her handler's voice, her head tilting with the concentrated attention of a dog trying to locate someone who wasn't there. Ben had to pause the video for a moment, his vision blurred by tears he'd been holding back for 2 years. "I need you to keep playing it," Grace said softly. "For her sake, if not for yours." Ben pressed play again, and Marcus continued speaking directly to his therapy dog with the same gentle tone he'd used when she was learning new commands. "The thing is, girl, this isn't your fault. Nothing that happens after tonight is your fault, okay? You did everything right. You helped me more than anyone else even tried to help me. You never judged me for waking up screaming or for crying when the fireworks went off on the 4th of July. You never told me to man up or get over it. You just stayed with me, and that meant everything." Ben's hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold the phone steady. This wasn't the angry condemnation he'd been expecting. This was Marcus saying goodbye to the one being who had truly understood him. "I want you to know that you're a good dog, Liberty, the best dog. And when they find you a new handler, because I know Dr. Mills will make sure you get paired with someone who needs you, I want you to help them the same way you helped me. Don't hold back because you think you failed me. You didn't fail me, girl. I failed me." Marcus paused in the video, reaching out to touch the camera lens as if he could pet Liberty through the screen. "But here's the thing I need you to understand, and I need you to help Dad understand too, if he ever watches this. I'm not leaving because I'm weak. I'm not leaving because I'm a coward. I'm leaving because the pain is bigger than I am, and I can't carry it anymore. It's not anyone's fault. Not yours, not Dad's, not even mine. Sometimes the war just wins." The video showed Marcus leaning back, his expression growing more distant as he prepared to end the recording. But then he seemed to remember something important and he leaned forward again. "Oh, and Liberty, there's one more thing. You know how I've been teaching you to take care of Dad when he comes to visit, how you always go check on him when he falls asleep in the chair, make sure he's still breathing. I need you to keep doing that. He's going to need you more than he knows. He's going to need you to teach him the same thing you taught me, that it's okay to accept help, that loving someone doesn't mean you have to carry their pain alone." Marcus smiled then, the first genuine smile Ben had seen from his son in months. "Be a good girl, Liberty, and when you see Dad, because I know you will somehow, tell him I love him. Tell him I understand why he couldn't let me keep you before. Tell him it's okay. Tell him I forgive him for not knowing how to help me. And tell him that maybe now he can learn." The video ended with Marcus reaching out to turn off the camera, and the screen went dark. Ben sat in the police station waiting room, clutching his dead son's phone, while Liberty pressed her warm body against his legs and Grace squeezed his shoulder with gentle fingers. "He knew," Ben whispered. "Somehow, he knew you'd end up with me." Liberty looked up at him with those impossibly intelligent eyes, and Ben could swear he saw Marcus in them, not as a haunting presence, but as a gift. His son had trained this dog not just for his own healing, but for the healing Ben would need after he was gone. "He planned this," Ben said, understanding flooding over him like sunrise after the longest night of his life. "Marcus knew I'd blame myself. He knew I'd need help learning how to forgive myself. So he trained you to take care of me, too." Liberty's tail wagged once, slowly, and she placed her paw on Ben's chest, right over his heart, just as she'd done in the river. It was Marcus's way of saying goodbye and hello and I love you all at the same time. 3 weeks after pulling Liberty from the Yellowstone River, Ben Harrison discovered that his son had left him one final surprise. He was cleaning out Marcus's room, really cleaning it, not just the surface dusting he'd done to preserve everything exactly as it had been, when Liberty began pawing insistently at the loose floorboard beside Marcus's desk. "What is it, girl?" Ben asked, though he was beginning to understand that Liberty's behavioral cues were never arbitrary. She had spent the past weeks teaching him to read her signals the same way Marcus had learned to interpret her alerts for anxiety attacks and nightmares. Beneath the floorboard, wrapped in an old army blanket, Ben found a manila envelope marked, "For Dad, open only if something happens to me." His hands trembled as he broke the seal, revealing documents that would change everything he thought he knew about his son's final months. The first document was a letter of acceptance to veterinary school at Colorado State University, dated just 2 months before Marcus's death. The second was a detailed business plan for a therapy dog training facility, complete with financial projections and partnership proposals with the local VA hospital. The third was a bank statement showing that Marcus had been saving money from his disability payments, building a fund specifically designated for Dad's Ranch foreclosure prevention. But it was the handwritten letter at the bottom of the envelope that broke Ben's heart and rebuilt it simultaneously. Dad, if you're reading this, then I couldn't find another way out of the darkness. I know you're going to blame yourself, and I know you're going to think I gave up. But I want you to know that I tried. I tried so hard to get better, not just for me, but for you and for Mom's memory. The therapy dog program wasn't about replacing human connection. It was about learning how to accept it again. Liberty taught me that healing isn't weakness. She taught me that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you need help. I applied to vet school because I wanted to train therapy dogs like Liberty. I wanted to help other veterans learn what she taught me. And I was saving money to help you keep the ranch because I know how much it means to you, even if you'd never ask for help. The business plan in this envelope, that was my dream for us. A place where broken soldiers and rescue dogs could heal each other. If I'm gone, it means the darkness won this round. But that doesn't mean the dream has to die with me. Liberty knows the training protocols. She can teach other dogs what she learned. And maybe if you can forgive yourself for not being able to save me, you can save someone else instead. Ben sat on the floor of his son's room, surrounded by the blueprints of a future Marcus had never gotten to see, while Liberty pressed her warm body against his side. Through the window he could see Grace Henderson's car pulling into his driveway. She'd been coming by daily since the incident at Dr. Mills's clinic, bringing groceries and making sure Ben was eating, sleeping, and slowly learning to live with hope instead of guilt. "Ben?" Grace's voice carried from the kitchen. "You in here?" "In Marcus's room," Ben called back, his voice hoarse with unshed tears. Grace appeared in the doorway, took one look at the papers scattered around Ben, and immediately understood. She'd seen enough families receive posthumous messages to recognize the particular brand of devastation and healing that came with them. "What did he tell you?" she asked, settling beside him on the floor with the easy familiarity of someone who'd stopped asking permission to offer comfort. Ben handed her the letter, watching her face change as she read Marcus's final gift to his father. When she finished, she looked up with the same expression of wonder and heartbreak that Ben was still processing. "He planned for this," she said quietly. "Even in his darkest moments, he was still trying to take care of you. I failed him, Grace. I failed him completely. But somehow, he still believed in me enough to leave me instructions for how to honor his memory." Liberty whined softly and nudged the business plan with her nose, her message clear. This wasn't just about the past. This was about the future Marcus had envisioned, the healing facility that could still become reality. Over the next 2 hours, Ben and Grace spread Marcus's plans across the kitchen table, studying the detailed proposals with growing amazement. Marcus had researched everything. State licensing requirements for therapy, animal facilities, federal grants available for veteran support programs, even architectural plans for converting unused ranch buildings into training spaces and temporary housing for veterans in crisis. "This is incredible," Grace breathed, running her finger along Marcus's carefully drawn diagrams. "He thought of everything. Look at this. He even included a section about hiring staff with both military and medical backgrounds." Ben studied the financial projections, his firefighter's practical mind automatically calculating costs and benefits. He estimated it would take about $50,000 to get started, assuming we used the existing ranch infrastructure. The money he saved would cover maybe a third of that. What about the rest? Before Ben could answer, Liberty barked once, a sharp, attention-getting sound that made them both look toward the window. A truck was pulling into the driveway, followed by two more vehicles. Ben didn't recognize any of them, but Liberty was wagging her tail with excited recognition. The first man out of the lead truck was wearing a Vietnam Veterans Association cap and walked with the distinctive gait of someone carrying old shrapnel in his legs. The second was younger, maybe Iraq or Afghanistan, with the 1,000-yard stare that Ben had learned to recognize in Marcus's eyes. The third was a woman in her 50s, wearing scrubs that marked her as medical personnel. "Mr. Harrison?" The older veteran approached the porch with respectful caution. "I'm Tom Brennan, chapter president of VVA Post 847. We heard about what happened with Dr. Mills and your son's therapy dog. We were hoping we could talk." Liberty had bounded out to greet the visitors, her tail wagging with the enthusiasm of a dog meeting old friends. The younger veteran knelt to pet her, and Ben could see some of the tension leave the man's shoulders as Liberty leaned into his touch. "She remembers us," the man said with wonder. "From the VA hospital before Dr. Mills lost her license. Liberty used to visit the PTSD group I was in." Ben felt pieces clicking into place. "You knew Marcus?" "We all did," the woman in scrubs said, stepping forward. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, staff psychologist at the VA. Marcus was one of our success stories, at least we thought he was. He never missed a session, always participated in group therapy, made real progress with Liberty's help. When he died, it devastated the entire program." Tom Brennan pulled a folder from his truck and handed it to Ben. "After Dr. Mills lost her license and the therapy dog program got shut down, a lot of us have been struggling. The suicide rate in our support groups has tripled. We need what Marcus was building, a place where veterans can work with therapy animals in a residential setting, away from the triggers and pressures of regular life." Ben opened the folder to find a collection of personal checks, small donations from veterans across Montana and Wyoming, each one made out to Marcus Harrison Memorial Therapy Ranch. The amounts weren't large, $20 here, $50 there, but they added up to nearly $15,000. "How did you even know about Marcus's plans?" Ben asked, overwhelmed by the gesture. Dr. Chen smiled sadly. "He presented his business proposal to our board of directors just 2 weeks before he died. We were going to approve funding for a pilot program, but then," she gestured helplessly, "by the time we got our bureaucratic act together, it was too late." The younger veteran, who'd introduced himself as Danny Rodriguez, looked up from where he was still petting Liberty. "Mr. Harrison, I've been clean from alcohol for 6 months because of what Liberty taught me about accepting help without shame. There are dozens of us who owe our lives to therapy dogs like her. If you build what Marcus designed, you won't have any shortage of people who need it." Ben looked down at Marcus's business plans, then at the checks from veterans who'd never met his son but understood his vision, then at Grace, who was watching him with the patient expression of someone waiting for him to realize what he already knew he was going to do. "It would mean giving up the cattle operation," he said quietly, "converting the ranch completely. No going back." "Marcus already thought of that," Grace pointed out, tapping the financial projections. "Look at his numbers. A therapy ranch would be more profitable than cattle and infinitely more meaningful." Liberty barked once and placed her paw on the business plan, her vote cast with typical canine certainty. Tom Brennan chuckled at the dog's obvious opinion. "Looks like Liberty's ready to get back to work," he said. "Question is, are you ready to help her?" Ben Harrison looked around his kitchen table at the faces of people he'd never met before today. Veterans who'd known his son's pain, medical professionals who'd witnessed his struggle, and Liberty who'd been patiently waiting for him to understand that Marcus's death didn't have to be the end of Marcus's dream. "Yeah," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Yeah, I think I am." 6 months later, Ben Harrison stood on the front porch of what had once been a failing cattle ranch and was now the Marcus Harrison Memorial Therapy Ranch, watching Liberty train her third litter of puppies in the art of reading human emotions. The transformation had been nothing short of miraculous, not just of the property, but of Ben himself. The old cattle barn had been converted into a state-of-the-art training facility, complete with obstacle courses designed to build confidence in both dogs and their human partners. The bunkhouse that once sheltered seasonal ranch hands now provided temporary housing for veterans participating in the residential program. And the pasture where Ben's cattle had once grazed was now divided into training paddocks where men and women who'd lost pieces of themselves in foreign wars slowly learned to trust again with the help of four-legged therapists. Liberty's really something, isn't she? Grace Henderson, now Grace Harrison, as of 3 weeks ago, emerged from the ranch office with a cup of coffee and the satisfied expression of someone who'd found her true calling. She'd given up her retirement to become the ranch's head medical coordinator, overseeing the psychological aspects of the therapy program with the same compassionate efficiency she'd brought to decades of nursing. Ben wrapped his arm around his new wife's shoulders, still amazed by how naturally happiness had returned to his life once he'd stopped fighting it. Marcus knew what he was doing when he picked her. Look at that. In the training paddock, Liberty was working with Danny Rodriguez, the young Iraq veteran who'd been one of the ranch's first residents. Danny had arrived 6 months ago barely able to make eye contact with another human being, his PTSD so severe that he'd been living in his car rather than risk the nightmares that came with sleeping indoors. Now he was Liberty's assistant trainer, helping her teach new therapy dogs the subtle art of recognizing and responding to human distress. "Easy, Atlas," Danny was saying to a young German shepherd who was Liberty's grandson. "See how his breathing changed. That's your cue to move closer, but not too fast. Let him set the pace." The veteran Danny was working with was Tom Brennan's nephew, a Marine who'd lost his left leg to an IED in Syria and hadn't spoken more than a dozen words since arriving at the ranch 2 weeks ago. But as Atlas approached with Liberty's patient confidence, the young Marine's rigid posture began to soften slightly. "It's working," Grace murmured, her voice filled with the wonder that came from watching healing happen in real time. "He's actually relaxing." Ben nodded, his throat tight with emotions he was still learning to express freely. The ranch now served 42 veterans at any given time, with a waiting list that stretched 6 months into the future. They'd had 3 successful suicide interventions, dozens of veterans who'd returned to their families with new coping skills, and a therapy dog graduation rate that was making national news. But the real miracle wasn't in the statistics. It was in moments like this, when Liberty's wisdom and Marcus's vision combined to give broken people permission to heal. "Dad?" A familiar voice called from the direction of the main house, and Ben turned to see someone who'd become an unexpected part of their extended family. "Doctor." Patricia Mills walked toward them with careful steps, Liberty's latest litter of puppies tumbling around her feet like furry shadows. The transformation in Dr. Mills had been almost as dramatic as the ranch's renovation. After her arrest and subsequent psychiatric evaluation, she'd been diagnosed with severe depression and PTSD, professional trauma from years of watching patients struggle with conditions she couldn't cure. Instead of prison, she'd been sentenced to community service and mandatory therapy, both of which she was completing at the ranch. "The morning feeding is done," she reported, her voice still carrying traces of the fragility that had led to her breakdown, but strengthened by months of proper treatment and purposeful work. "And I think Bella is ready to start basic alert training. She's been shadowing her mother during the advanced sessions." Ben studied Dr. Mills with the careful assessment that had become second nature. 6 months ago, she'd been a broken woman living in squalor, holding Liberty prisoner in a twisted attempt to honor Marcus's memory. Now she was an integral part of the ranch's success, using her veterinary psychology training to help develop more effective therapy dog protocols. "What do you think, Liberty?" Ben asked the dog who'd become the ranch's unofficial supervisor. "Is Bella ready?" Liberty looked up from her work with the new veteran, her intelligent brown eyes moving from Ben to Dr. Mills to the puppy in question. After a moment of consideration, she barked once, her signal for yes, and returned her attention to the young Marine, who was now tentatively reaching out to touch Atlas's head. "There's something else," Dr. Mills said, pulling an envelope from her jacket pocket. "This came in today's mail. It's addressed to you, but I think it's really meant for all of us." Ben recognized the official seal of the Department of Veterans Affairs immediately. Over the past 6 months, he'd become intimately familiar with federal bureaucracy, as he'd navigated the complex process of getting the ranch certified as an official VA treatment facility. Inside the envelope was a letter that would change everything yet again. "Mr. Harrison," Ben read aloud, Grace reading over his shoulder, "we are pleased to inform you that the Marcus Harrison Memorial Therapy Ranch has been selected to receive a 3-year federal grant in the amount of $2.4 million to expand your residential therapy program and serve as a model facility for similar programs nationwide." Grace's gasp was audible, but Ben kept reading, his voice growing stronger with each incredible word. "Your program's success rate in reducing veteran suicide attempts and facilitating successful reintegration into civilian life has attracted national attention. We would like to partner with your facility to train therapy dog handlers for VA hospitals across the country, using the protocols developed by your staff." Ben had to stop reading for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Marcus's dream had become. What had started as one young veteran's desperate attempt to heal himself had grown into something that could help thousands of people. "There's more," Grace said, pointing to the next paragraph. "Look at this. We are particularly impressed by your facility's innovative approach to treating both human and animal trauma simultaneously. Your program's integration of formerly unstable individuals into therapeutic roles has demonstrated that healing is most effective when it includes the opportunity to help others heal." Dr. Mills's eyes filled with tears as the meaning of those words sank in. The ranch hadn't just saved the veterans who came there seeking help. It had saved her too, giving her a chance to transform her guilt and obsession into something genuinely helpful. "Marcus would be so proud," she whispered, and for the first time since Ben had met her, there was no mania or desperation in her voice, just gratitude and wonder at how far they'd all come. The sound of laughter drew their attention back to the training paddock, where something remarkable was happening. The young Marine, who hadn't spoken in weeks, was not only petting Atlas, but talking to him in the low, gentle tones that therapy dogs seem to inspire in even the most traumatized humans. "That's it, boy," the Marine was saying. "You understand, don't you? You know what it's like to be scared." Danny Rodriguez caught Ben's eye and grinned, giving him a thumbs up that conveyed more pride and joy than any formal evaluation could have captured. In 6 months, Danny had gone from a suicidal veteran living in his car to an expert trainer helping other veterans find their way back to life. "We're going to need more space," Grace said practically, already mentally calculating the logistics of expanding the program. "More staff, more dogs, more everything." "We'll manage," Ben said, watching Liberty work with her usual patient competence. "Marcus left us pretty detailed instructions for scaling up operations. It's all in his business plan." As if summoned by the mention of her late handler's name, Liberty finished her session with the young Marine and trotted over to Ben. She'd developed a routine over the past months of checking on him several times throughout each day, monitoring his emotional state with the same dedication she'd once shown Marcus. But today, instead of her usual health check, Liberty did something she'd never done before. She sat directly in front of Ben, looked him straight in the eyes, and placed both of her front paws on his chest in a gesture that felt unmistakably like a salute. "She knows," Dr. Mills said softly. "She knows what we've accomplished here. She knows Marcus's dream is alive." Ben reached out to scratch behind Liberty's ears, his vision blurred by tears of gratitude and joy. "Yeah, girl, I think she does." As the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ben Harrison stood surrounded by the family he'd never expected to have. Grace, Dr. Mills, Danny, Tom Brennan, and dozens of other veterans who'd found healing in the place Marcus had envisioned. Liberty's puppies played at their feet, future therapy dogs who would carry Marcus's legacy to veterans across the country. The ranch was quiet now, settled into the peaceful rhythm of evening chores and dinner preparations. But Ben could feel the presence of everyone who'd made this moment possible. Sarah, who'd taught him that love meant supporting each other's dreams, Marcus, who'd shown him that asking for help was the first step toward healing, and Liberty, who'd bridged the gap between father and son, between past and future, between despair and hope. "Thank you," Ben whispered, not sure if he was talking to his son, his dog, or the universe itself. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Liberty wagged her tail once and headed toward the house, where dinner was waiting and tomorrow's work beckoned. She'd taught Ben everything Marcus had wanted him to learn, that healing was possible, that love could transcend death, and that sometimes the best way to honor those we've lost is to help others find their way home. The Marcus Harrison Memorial Therapy Ranch was more than a treatment facility now. It was proof that even the darkest tragedies could be transformed into something beautiful if you had the courage to accept help and the wisdom to pass it on. And as Ben followed Liberty toward the warm lights of home, he knew that Marcus would have been proud of what they'd built together, not just the ranch, but the family, the healing, and the hope that would continue long after they were all gone. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't between two people. They're between a broken soul and the second chance they never saw coming. Ben Harrison thought his story ended when he lost his wife to cancer and his son to the invisible wounds of war. At 68, facing foreclosure and drowning in regret, he was ready to give up. Then Liberty, a German shepherd drowning in the Yellowstone River, changed everything. She wasn't just any dog, she was the therapy dog his son Marcus had begged for, the help Ben had been too proud to allow. What started as a desperate rescue became a journey of healing that transformed not just Ben's life, but the lives of dozens of veterans who found hope at the Marcus Harrison Memorial Therapy Ranch. This story reminds us that it's never too late to honor those we've lost by helping those who remain. Sometimes our deepest pain becomes our greatest purpose, and the family we rescue ends up rescuing us right back. If you've ever felt like your best years were behind you, or wondered if your mistakes could ever be redeemed, Ben and Liberty's story proves that healing and happiness can begin at any age. What second chance are you hoping for in this season of your life? Have you ever experienced an unexpected moment that completely changed your perspective on what's possible? Share your thoughts below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.